There are monsters in the galaxy that blot out suns. There are gods that whisper across eternity. There are daemons that unmake reality with a thought. But none of them are as terrifying as a Primarch. Because a Primarch is not a mistake of nature. He is design. When the Emperor of mankind forged his 20 sons, he did not craft generals. He engineered inevitability. Each Primarch was created from the Emperor's own genetic template, augmented, refined, amplified beyond comprehension. They are not simply larger Space Marines. They are the source from which Space Marines flow. The gene seed implanted into every astartes originates from them. They are the blueprint. A Space Marine is a demigod to mortal men. A Primarch is what that demigod kneels to. Imagine a being over 3 meters tall, wrapped in armor that weighs more than a battle tank, yet moves faster than a striking serpent. A being whose mind can calculate planetary invasions in seconds, whose presence alone bends the morale of millions. Now remove the idea that he is human, because he is not. When Robut Guviman walks into a war council chamber, conversations do not merely stop, they die. Because everyone present understands that they are in the presence of something closer to the Emperor than to themselves. A Primarch does not inspire loyalty the way a general does. He compels it. Not through psychic manipulation, not through overt force, but through gravitational authority. It is biological. It is encoded. Their gene sons feel it most strongly. Astartes, who would stand unflinching before artillery barrages, feel their hearts accelerate when their Primarch turns his gaze upon them. It is not fear of punishment. It is fear of inadequacy. And yet, physical presence is the least frightening thing about a Primarch. They were not merely built to conquer worlds. They were built to reshape them. Take Vulcan, who could craft weapons capable of altering the fate of civilizations. Take Magnus, whose psychic power rivaled the greatest warp entities. Take Leman Russ, who hunted monsters older than humanity and returned wearing their pelts. Each one is a singularity of war. A Primarch on a battlefield does not tip the scales, he erases them. During the Great Crusade, entire planetary campaigns ended within hours of a Primarch making planetfall. Enemy commanders who had resisted Imperial fleets for months broke upon seeing one stride through bombardment fire without slowing. Bolter rounds detonate harmlessly against their armor. Plasma burns fail to halt them. They do not fall back. They do not hesitate. They advance. But here is the truth that makes them terrifying beyond measure. They are not stable. They are emotional extremes given divine biology. Each Primarch embodies a concept amplified to catastrophic proportions. Honor, rage, logic, faith, ambition, resentment. And when those traits fracture, entire legions fracture with them. The Horus heresy was not caused by armies. It was caused by wounded pride, by doubt, by corruption whispering into a Primarch's ear. When Horus fell, half the galaxy followed him into damnation. Because when a Primarch breaks, civilizations break. To stand before a Primarch is to stand before potential extinction, not because he intends it, but because if he chooses it, there is almost nothing that can stop him. A demon prince may be powerful, a hive tyrant may be monstrous, a Catan shard may bend reality, but a Primarch commands fleets, a Primarch commands legions, a Primarch commands belief. And belief is the most destructive force in the 41st millennium. In the darkness of the current age, only one loyalist Primarch walks openly among humanity. Robut Guliman. And even now, 10,000 years after his birth, hardened chapter masters feel something primal in his presence, something ancient, something overwhelming. Because deep down, every warrior understands if he commanded them to march into a star, they would, without question. This is why a Primarch is terrifying. Not because he is strong, not because he is intelligent, not because he is immortal, but because he is proof that humanity can create gods. And gods, when they bleed, the galaxy burns. The aura of the demigod. The first thing you notice is the silence, not the absence of sound, the absence of resistance. When a Primarch enters a space, resistance evaporates. Veteran chapter masters, warriors who have commanded fleets for centuries, find their objections dissolving mid-sentence. Astra Militarum generals who have overseen planetary defenses feel like children presenting sandcastles to an architect of empires. It is not hypnosis. It is not psychic domination. It is presence amplified beyond mortal tolerance. A Primarch's voice is not loud. It does not need to be. When Rogel Dorn spoke, fortifications were raised before doubt could form. When Sanguinius addressed his legion, warriors wept openly, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of devotion. They were engineered to be followed. Their very genetic structure radiates command authority. Every Space Marine carries a fragment of his Primarch within his altered organs and rewritten DNA. When the Gene Sire stands before them, something ancient activates. Posture straightens, breathing steadies, doubt vanishes. It is not worship, it is alignment, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. But what makes this terrifying is not how they control their sons, it is how they affect everyone else. Baseline humans cannot process a Primarch normally. Reports from the Great Crusade describe mortals struggling to maintain eye contact. Some fell to their knees without realizing they had done so. Others felt overwhelming emotions, adoration, dread, shame, without understanding why. A Primarch does not merely walk into a room, he dominates its psychological gravity. Imagine standing before a being who is taller, stronger, faster, and smarter than any human alive. Now imagine knowing, instinctively, that he was built to replace you, that your species is merely the clay from which he was sculpted, that he is what humanity becomes when stripped of weakness. That realization is what terrifies. And then there is their speed. Accounts from the battlefield often fail to capture it. Observers describe Primarchs as blurs of ceramite and gold. One moment they are across the field, the next, enemy warlords lie in pieces. Angren once tore through an entire formation of elite warriors before their targeting optics recalibrated. The Lion crossed a chamber and decapitated a rebel commander before bodyguards could raise their weapons. Fulgrim fought at such velocity that eyewitnesses disagreed on how many blades he wielded. They are not simply strong, they are inevitable. Yet what truly elevates them beyond monsters is their minds. Each Primarch possessed intellect operating on a scale beyond mortal strategists. Robute Guliman could administer an empire of 500 worlds without collapse. Perturabu could calculate siege projections in real time mid-battle. Magnus could perceive warp currents like a navigator reading stars. They were not just warriors, they were solutions to rebellion, to stagnation, to extinction. The Emperor did not create sons, he created answers. And yet, every answer contains a flaw, because for all their perfection, Primarchs feel deeply, too deeply. They experience loyalty like fanaticism, betrayal like annihilation, pride like destiny. When Horus believed he had been abandoned, the galaxy trembled.
When Lorgar felt spiritually rejected, he searched for gods who would answer him. When Angren's rage consumed him, it reshaped his legion into butchers. Their emotions are magnified by biology, and magnified emotion in a being of such scale is catastrophic. This is what makes a Primarch more frightening than any demon. A demon is chaos made manifest, predictable in its hunger. A Primarch is focused purpose wrapped around unimaginable power. If he stands with you, he is salvation. If he stands against you, he is extinction wearing a human face. And the worst part? He still believes he is right. When Guilliman returned in the 41st Millennium, hardened warriors who had fought for centuries felt something they had not experienced in ages: relief. Because for 10,000 years, humanity had fought without its gods, and suddenly, one walked among them again. But relief carries its own terror, because if even one Primarch can alter the fate of the Imperium, imagine what happens when more return, or when they turn. A Primarch is not simply a super warrior, he is a fulcrum. Place him on the wrong side of history, and the galaxy tilts into ruin. Say the word when you're ready for Chapter 1, Part 3.
When gods bleed. There is a lie whispered across the Imperium that Primarchs are invincible. They are not. They can bleed. They can fall. And that is precisely what makes them more terrifying than anything else in the galaxy. When a Space Marine dies, a squad mourns. When a Chapter Master falls, a chapter trembles. When a Primarch is wounded, reality itself seems to hesitate. During the Dropsite Massacre on Istvan V, Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon of Medusa, met his brother Fulgrim in single combat, two demigods forged by the same hand, clashing with weapons that could shatter titans. The duel was not long. It was not cinematic. It was catastrophic. Ferrus Manus lost his head, and with that single strike, an entire legion lost its center of gravity. The Iron Hands did not retreat. They shattered. Because when your gene sire dies, something inside you fractures too. The sons feel it in their blood, in their bones, in the echo of genetic memory screaming that something foundational has been torn away. A Primarch's death is not an event. It is a psychic aftershock. Then there is Sanguinius, the angel. He faced Horus aboard the vengeful spirit, knowing he would die. He went anyway. Not because he believed he would win, but because someone had to stand between humanity and its annihilation. Imagine the terror of fighting a being like Horus at the height of his corruption, warp energy coiling around him like a living storm, and still stepping forward. Sanguinius was not afraid of death. He was afraid of failure. That kind of resolve is not comforting. It is chilling, because it proves Primarchs do not think like mortals. They calculate sacrifice on a galactic scale. And yet, when Horus fell beneath the Emperor's wrath, something even more horrifying became clear. If a Primarch can be turned, if the War Master himself can betray everything, then perfection is fragile. The Emperor did not miscalculate their strength. He miscalculated their humanity. They were designed to conquer stars, but they still yearned for approval, for purpose, for belief. And chaos does not need perfection. It needs doubt. What makes a Primarch the most frightening being in Warhammer 40K is not just their power, it is their potential. A demon is bound to the warp. A Xenos warlord is bound to biology. A Primarch? He
is bound only by conviction. If his conviction aligns with humanity, he becomes its greatest champion. If it fractures, he becomes its apocalypse. Look at the galaxy now. The cicatrix maledictum splits the Imperium in half. Demons spill from reality like blood from an open wound. The Astronomicon flickers, and somewhere, in stasis tombs or demon worlds or forgotten corners of the warp, the remaining Primarchs wait. Sleeping giants, lost kings, broken gods. Each one a turning point, each one capable of rewriting fate. This is the final truth. A Primarch is frightening because he proves something undeniable. Humanity can create gods, but it cannot control them. And when gods bleed, empires drown.
Before a Primarch was a legend, he was a project. Deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, within laboratories older than most civilizations, the Emperor began his most dangerous work. Not armies, not titans, not fleets. Suns. 20 beings crafted not merely from gene code, but from intent. Each Primarch was engineered with a purpose embedded at the cellular level, not just enhanced muscle density or accelerated cognition, but archetype programming, roles written into their existence. The Emperor did not create equals, he created functions. Rabute Guilliman was not simply intelligent, he was governance incarnate. Even as a child on Macrage, he reorganized political systems, optimized trade routes, stabilized entire continents. His mind processed administration the way a warrior processes combat. Perturabo was not merely a siege master, he understood structures. He could look at a fortress and instinctively perceive its weaknesses like cracks in glass. Geometry bent obediently beneath his gaze. Lemon Russ was not only savage, he was controlled savagery, executioner protocol wrapped in fangs, the Emperor's sanction made flesh. Each Primarch was a solution to a specific problem: conquest, compliance, control, faith, fear. But something went wrong. The warp does not tolerate order. Before the Emperor could complete their upbringing, the infant Primarchs were stolen, scattered across the galaxy in a storm of empiric sabotage. They did not grow beneath the Emperor's guidance. They grew in crucibles. And crucibles do not produce uniform outcomes. Consider Angron. He did not grow up learning diplomacy. He grew up in chains, implanted with the butcher's nails, devices that rewired his brain to reward rage and punish calm. Imagine designing a general and fate turning him into a berserker. Now imagine giving that berserker a legion of superhuman warriors. That is not a miscalculation, that is a catastrophe. Or Conrad Kurz, raised on Nostromo, a world drowning in crime and corruption, he became justice, but not law, justice without restraint. He did not believe in hope, he believed in fear, because fear worked. And when the Emperor found him, he did not remove that lesson, he weaponized it. Here lies the unsettling truth. The Emperor did not attempt to fix their trauma. He used it. Angron's rage became a tool. Kurz's brutality became a deterrent. Mortarion's hatred of tyrants became rebellion harnessed against alien overlords. The Emperor saw brokenness and saw utility. This is what makes the Primarchs terrifying. They are not clean designs. They are scarred weapons, each one shaped by environment, culture, and suffering.
then handed authority over legions capable of planetary genocide. They are demigods raised by chance, forged by hardship, and validated by conquest. And conquest reinforces everything. If rage wins wars, rage becomes righteousness. If fear enforces compliance, fear becomes doctrine. By the time the Great Crusade reached its height, the Primarchs were not merely generals, they were myths walking. Entire planetary populations knelt at their arrival. Some saw angels, others saw conquerors. None saw children taken from their father and told to earn his love through war. This is the fracture point, because when you create beings of immense power and you validate them only through victory, you teach them something dangerous. Worth equals triumph, and triumph justifies anything. A Primarch is frightening not only because of what he can destroy, but because he was taught that destruction is proof of value. The Emperor made weapons. The galaxy made them personal. And personal weapons are the hardest to control.
They were not raised together. They did not share childhoods. They did not grow beneath the same sky. Yet when the Emperor reunited his scattered sons during the Great Crusade, something instinctive ignited between them. Recognition. Not friendship, not trust. Recognition. Each Primarch saw in the others a mirror distorted by fate. Same origin, different outcome. And in that reflection lay admiration and rivalry. When Horus met Sanguinius, there was warmth. When Russ met the lion, there was tension sharp enough to draw blood. When Perturbaru stood beside Dorn, resentment crystallized into inevitability. They were brothers only in genetics. In temperament, they were storms colliding. Horus was the brightest star, charismatic, calculating, capable of inspiring absolute loyalty without raising his voice. Warriors followed him not because they were ordered, but because they wanted to. The Emperor named him War Master, first among equals. That title alone was enough to fracture unity, because Primarchs do not measure themselves against mortals, they measure themselves against each other, and none of them were built to be second. Rogel Dorn built fortresses that could withstand extinction-level threats. Perturbaru dismantled civilizations stone by stone, both masters of siegecraft, both believing their method superior. Their rivalry was not petty, it was philosophical. Defense versus annihilation, endurance versus domination. And when recognition favors one brother over another, bitterness does not fade, it ferments. Then there was Lorgar, the most devout. He did not seek conquest for its own sake, he sought meaning. While others conquered worlds in the Emperor's name, Lorgar worshipped him, built cathedrals, spread faith, and for that he was humiliated. Monarchia burned, his greatest achievement reduced to ash by order of the very father he adored. In that moment, something irreversible occurred. Not rebellion, worse, disillusionment. Primarchs were not designed for small emotions. When they love, it is absolute. When they resent, it is consuming. When they feel slighted, it reshapes destiny. The Emperor believed he could manage them as generals, but they were not generals. They were sovereign personalities commanding armies, each one convinced deeply that their vision was correct. And they were not wrong. That is what makes it tragic. Each Primarch was right from his own perspective. Russ believed in strength through loyalty. Magnus believed knowledge was salvation. Mortarion believed tyranny must be crushed. Kurz believed fear was the only truth. Individually, these philosophies could coexist. Together, they became fault lines. The Great Crusade masked these fractures. Victory is a powerful anesthetic.
As long as worlds fell and banners rose, tension remained contained. But beneath triumph simmered comparison. Who conquered faster? Who lost fewer men? Who earned more praise? Who received the emperor's attention? And attention, more than power, was the rarest currency among them. Imagine being engineered to be exceptional, to surpass every human alive, to command legions of gene-forged warriors, and still crave your father's approval. That craving is not weakness, it is design oversight, or perhaps design inevitability. The emperor gave them purpose, he did not give them emotional closure. And so the brothers stood at the edge of empire, 20 demigods expanding humanity across the stars, united in banner, divided in belief. It would not take an external enemy to break them. It would take a whisper, a seed of doubt, a suggestion that one brother deserved more, that one had been wronged, that one had been overlooked. And once that seed found fertile ground, the galaxy would burn not from invasion, but from family.
The galaxy does not weep for fallen Primarchs. It shatters. Because when a Primarch turns, it is not a simple betrayal. It is an avalanche, a rupture that echoes across thousands of worlds, across millions of warriors, across the very fabric of human belief. Horus did not merely rebel. He became the war master of chaos incarnate, a living argument that even divinity can be seduced. It began with whispers, subtle, almost imperceptible, questions of purpose, doubts seeded by demonic manipulation, pride winded, ego inflamed, all magnified by the unique biology of a Primarch. A mortal would falter, a space marine might hesitate, a Primarch reacts, with decisiveness, with conviction, with consequences measured in planetary devastation. The first confrontation was subtle. Horus's actions did not announce rebellion, they tested loyalty. Commanders questioned orders, legions wavered, planets fell inexplicably. The Great Crusade's seamless advance fractured. The Emperor noticed, but the Emperor could not intervene directly. Not yet. Primarchs are not merely instruments, they are independent forces. The most loyal cannot restrain them, the most obedient cannot command them. The War Master's mind moves faster than fleets can respond, faster than communications can track, faster than reason can process. And once his conviction is aligned against you, there is no defense. The heresy spread like a plague. Sons turned on brothers, space marine legions slaughtered each other, entire planetary systems became crucibles of fire and blood. The galaxy remembers Horus, but Horus was only the spark. Angron, the butcher, was driven to madness by implanted rage. He followed the call of chaos, not because he was seduced, but because his biology made him incapable of obedience. Lorgar, burned by the Emperor's condemnation, became a vessel of the warp's doctrine. Even the strongest, the most rational, the most disciplined could falter, because Primarchs are designed to excel, not to be controlled. The horror lies not in what a Primarch can do. It lies in the fact that one wrong alignment can collapse the calculated order of the universe. The Horus heresy was not an invasion, it was a fracture of divinity. Each legion a mirror of its Primarch. When the War Master fell, so did half the galaxy's defenders. Entire sectors, meticulously conquered over decades, were lost in months. Strategic mastery was meaningless in the face of a godlike being turning on the Imperium. And yet the tragedy is more subtle than mere carnage. It is psychological. Every loyalist who fought felt the weight of inevitability. Every soldier knew that even if victory was achieved, the enemy was not just Horus, it was internal. The enemy was not just Horus, it was the realization that humanity could create beings beyond its control, that their greatest hope
could become their ultimate doom. And this is what makes a Primarch truly frightening. Not their size, not their strength, not their mastery of war, but their autonomy, their judgment, their capacity for independent moral calculation magnified beyond human comprehension. When a Primarch chooses wrong, or is manipulated or betrayed, there is no force in the galaxy that can stop them. Only other Primarchs, and even then, only if the stars align. The galaxy learned this the hard way. Horus fell. The Imperium survived, but not unscarred. The Emperor did not weep. He prepared. Because even after the heresy, the shadow of what a Primarch could do, loyal or fallen, remained. A Primarch is the apex of human potential and the abyss into which humanity can plunge. And in the 41st millennium, there is no redemption, only vigilance.
The air inside the flagship Phalanx Obsidian was alive with hums, clanks, and a stench of oil and iron. Legionaries moved with mechanical precision, servicing weapons, inspecting armor, and maintaining the endless machinery that kept the ship operational. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, their humanity reduced to muscle memory and duty. And at the center of it all, the Primarch walked. Magnus the Red's presence did not announce itself with noise. It radiated. The engines, the servitors, even the air itself seemed to bend around him. Every action aboard the ship adjusted instinctively to his will, as though the vessel recognized its master. The weight of a Primarch is not physical, it is existential. Officers approached with clipped movements. Each spoke only when necessary, measured words trembling with suppressed awe. A single glance from Magnus could reroute the course of the ship, cancel entire operations, or instill unwavering courage in battalions of soldiers. Yet he did nothing of the sort. He walked slowly, inspecting the battle-ready tallies and production lines, noting structural weaknesses, and calculating planetary deployment strategies in his mind. Every thought was 1,000 calculations ahead of his subordinates. Time itself seemed to hesitate. A sergeant knelt as Magnus passed, placing a heavy report before him. The pages detailed planetary defenses, enemy formations, and logistical projections for the next campaign. Magnus flipped through them with imperceptible swiftness, his eyes scanning not the ink, but the latent patterns beneath it, the hidden weaknesses and the overlooked anomalies. Without a word, he tapped a line in the report. Orders would cascade across the ship and beyond, imperceptibly adjusting fleets, legions, and the Emperor's grand crusade. No one else could process his mind in real time, not even the most advanced servitors. The Primarch's influence extended beyond intellect. It was physiological. Legionaries felt it in their muscles, in their hearts, in the very synapses of their brains. A single thought of Magnus could drive them faster, strike harder, endure longer. They did not understand why, but their instincts obeyed him as if he were the gravity around which their entire existence orbited. This was not loyalty, it was inevitability. Below decks, engines groaned under impossible strain. Servitors repaired and recalibrated automatically. Magnets shifted, gravitic stabilizers adjusted, coolant systems rerouted. The Phalanx Obsidian responded to Magnus's subconscious, and yet he did not touch a single control. The ship was alive, but not in defiance, alive in obedience. Every bolt tightened, every conduit aligned, every weapon primed without instruction, because a Primarch's presence commands more than action, it commands consequence. In the mess halls, soldiers ate mechanically, their utensils paused mid-air when he entered the compartment.
In the armories, technicians adjusted weapon calibrations instinctively, as if Magnus's gaze could detect a misaligned laser sight from kilometers away. No one spoke freely, no one laughed, no one disobeyed. Even conversation faltered. The Primarch's mind worked in layers, a lattice of strategy, history, and calculation. He thought in 3 dimensions of warfare, 4 dimensions of time, and multiple dimensions of probability simultaneously. A single action aboard the ship could ripple across the sector and change the outcome of a planetary engagement hours later. Yet all who served him sensed only that they were a component in a larger, unstoppable system. And this is what terrifies anyone who glimpses a Primarch at work. Not their strength, not their speed, not their armor or their gene-enhanced senses, but the realization that the galaxy itself bends to them, not by force, but by inevitability. Magnus does not command in the way men command. He exists, and existence itself becomes direction, order, and law. And inside the largest ship in the Imperium, where every corridor, every servitor, every soldier is an extension of duty, that presence is absolute. Because in the 41st millennium, the line between leadership and godhood is measured in the weight of a single mind. And Magnus's mind weighs more than worlds. The corridors of the phalanx obsidian stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of steel, conduits, and grinding pistons. Servitors scuttled along the sides, performing endless maintenance tasks, their movements precise but lifeless, as if the ship itself had dictated their purpose. Magnus moved among them, and the machinery seemed to recognize him. Pumps regulated themselves to maintain optimal pressure. Magnets realigned. Cooling fluids adjusted their flow. Even the airlocks whispered in obedience as he passed, sealing and unsealing with a patience that mirrored his own. Every component of the vessel functioned with terrifying perfection. None of it was extraordinary on its own. What was extraordinary was the harmony, the instinctive obedience that did not require spoken orders. Legionnaires filed past him in silence, their armor clanking in muted rhythm. Their minds were attuned, senses heightened to detect any anomaly. The Primarch did not need to speak. His presence was command enough. A squad of tactical Marines paused mid-step. One soldier shifted a fraction of an inch out of alignment. Magnus's gaze fell upon him. The Marine froze, corrected himself, and continued as if compelled by some unseen hand. They were soldiers, yes, but in his presence they were extensions of thought, conduits for action that moved beyond instinct into inevitability. Below deck, in the armory, weapons hummed as if they could feel the Primarch's attention. Bolters realigned, plasma coils purged residual energy. Chain swords whirred to life and then fell silent again, awaiting his touch or his command. Servitors cleaned, adjusted, and recalibrated without supervision, performing duties that no mortal could manage alone. The ship did not merely support Magnus, it was an extension of him, and he of it. This interdependence was not mystical, it was biological, psychological, and logistical all at once. Every being aboard, human, augmented, or machine, was designed or trained to function optimally under his influence. His mental architecture interfaced with theirs subtly, aligning their reactions, speeding decision-making, reducing hesitation, and eliminating error. But this harmony had a cost. Obedience demanded surrender. The Legionnaires did not think independently. They did not question. They did not hesitate. Even when a subordinate noticed a flaw, a missed calculation, or a weak point in the ship's hull, they deferred instinctively, because Magnus's presence was authority absolute. To doubt was to destabilize the system. and instability could kill. He moved through the ship not as a commander, but as a law of physics, a force that dictated reality itself. In the bridge, astropaths relayed warp currents, monitoring the fluctuating tides that threatened the Imperium's progress. Magnus watched the stars, calculating planetary alignments, enemy movements, and psychic turbulence. Each observation reshaped the operations of his legions before a single order left his lips. A single calculation in his mind, how to deploy 20,000 Marines across 3 worlds simultaneously, could cascade across the Imperium, rerouting fleets, adjusting supply lines, and preempting rebellion. And none of it felt deliberate, because to a Primarch, it was inevitable. Outside, the void stretched endlessly, dotted with the fires of war. The Phalanx Obsidian was not the largest ship in the Imperium by chance. It was a moving fortress, a cathedral of steel, a manifestation of the Emperor's vision given shape and intelligence. Legionnaires lined the hull, monitoring sensors and feeding data into the ship's cognition. A single flaw, a single misalignment could cascade into catastrophe, but under Magnus's presence, errors ceased. The machinery of obedience ensured that every part of the vessel, every marine, every servitor responded to his will without hesitation. And if Magnus willed it, they would respond to the galaxy itself. This is what terrifies those who understand the truth. The galaxy does not fear the Primarch for his strength, it fears him for his inevitability. Magnus does not command the ship, he is the ship. Every soldier, every engine, every sensor bends to his cognition, and all who dwell within feel it, the crushing weight of certainty, the quiet horror of their own irrelevance, the impossible expectation of perfection that is no longer optional. In the 41st millennium, to be part of a Primarch's machine is to surrender your mind, your body, your will. And still, they march forward, because survival in the shadow of a god demands obedience.
The Phalanx Obsidian moved through the void as if it had a mind of its own. Sensors screamed with data, weapons charged silently, and the hull flexed against micrometeors and debris without prompting. Yet it was not the ship that held the galaxy in suspense. It was the Primarch within. Magnus's presence was everywhere. Every breath, every heartbeat, every micro-decision aboard the vessel bent to him. Even without speaking, he dictated strategy, tactics, and logistics simultaneously. A single thought could reroute entire fleets, recalibrate planetary defenses, and reorder reality along a trajectory of inevitability. The weight of a legion is more than men and machinery. It is responsibility amplified to impossible degrees. Each Marine knows that failure is not an option, not because Magnus demands perfection, but because the galaxy itself is fragile under his judgment. Every miscalculation resonates through billions of lives. Every hesitation is magnified into catastrophe. Legionaries slept poorly, ate poorly, and yet persisted, because the Primarch's presence instilled a sense that they were components of something greater, not greater in glory, but in consequence. To fail him was not shame, it was annihilation. Outside the ship, a world trembled. Enemy fleets attempted to interpose themselves between the Phalanx Obsidian and the target system. Astropathic sensors screamed warnings of psychic storms, warp distortions, and the whispers of daemon conspiracies. Magnus did not panic. His gaze swept the void, calculating vector fields, predicting warp currents, and anticipating the enemy's reactions. He did not issue orders, he radiated inevitability. The ship moved as an extension of him. The Legion moved as an extension of him. Even the enemy was unknowingly funneled into outcomes he had already determined.
Victory was not optional, it was certain. But certainty carries a cost. The Primarch does not pause for morality, for doubt, or for hesitation. His mind is a lattice of objectives, probabilities, and contingencies. Legionaries witness decisions executed without deliberation, often seeing their comrades sacrificed in ways that no mortal mind could reconcile. They survive because they must. They obey because they cannot do otherwise. And in those moments, the Primarch's presence is terrifying, not for what he can do, but for what he can compel you to endure. Magnus entered the command nexus, a room that resembled a cathedral of steel and psychic resonance. The ship's engines vibrated in perfect harmony with his thoughts. Tactical displays updated in real time, adapting to enemy movements before they occurred. Servitors moved with seamless coordination, anticipating his intent. He did not need to speak. He did not need to command. The galaxy itself responded. A single Marine dared to whisper a recommendation, and the words faltered under the gravity of his gaze. Even the suggestion seemed trivial compared to the weight of inevitability pressing down from the Primarch. And here lies the ultimate terror of a Primarch. They are not just living weapons, they are law incarnate. The consequences of their presence ripple through space, time, and mind. Their decisions are beyond human comprehension, their judgments inflexible, their foresight near perfect. When they act, it is not choice, it is determinism. When they move, the universe bends to follow. Magnus does not merely lead the Imperium's armies, he defines what the Imperium will do. A single world could rise against the Imperium, a single fleet could defy its course, a single legion could falter. And a Primarch ensures that none do, not through threat, not through punishment, but through inevitability. All that is left is obedience, and the silent terror of knowing that your survival, your purpose, and your very reality are subordinate to a being whose cognition eclipses comprehension. In the end, being under a Primarch's presence is not inspiring, it is oppressive. Because to serve a Primarch is to acknowledge the futility of resistance. And in the 41st millennium, that is the most frightening truth of all.
The corridors of the Phalanx Obsidian were endless, a twisting maze of steel, conduits, and pulsing servos. Light flickered intermittently, reflecting off armor plates and oil-stained floors. The ship was alive, but not in a way humans could perceive. It breathed with engines, groaned with stress, and shivered with every psychic resonance Magnus projected into its hull. Inside, the Legionnaires moved like clockwork. Every step, every gesture, every glance was a reaction to forces they barely understood. Not to the ship, not to the orders on the hololithic displays, but to him, the Primarch who occupied the center of their universe. Even in the silence, the ship whispered. Beneath decks, in chambers no human had reason to visit, the machinery worked tirelessly. Servitors labored, hands moving endlessly across panels and conduits, tightening, adjusting, recalibrating. They did not hesitate, they did not falter. They existed to obey the invisible force radiating from the Primarch above. And yet, Magnus did not directly command them. He merely walked. The corridors themselves responded to his presence. A pipeline corrected its pressure gradient. A coolant valve opened to prevent overheating. Even the air quality adjusted, maintaining optimal oxygen levels and circulation in anticipation of his path. It was subtle, silent, inevitably complete. Above, the bridge hummed with activity. Astropaths channeled information from the warp, translating its chaotic whispers into tactical possibilities. Navigators tuned themselves to currents of immaterial energy, calculating the safest paths through turbulence, and the Primarch observed. Not with curiosity, not with instruction, but with innate understanding. Every movement of the fleet, every adjustment of planetary defenses, every calculation of enemy strategy unfolded within his mind before a single report could reach the officers' consoles. No one could follow his thought process, not Guilliman, not Dorn, not any commander in the Imperium. And that is the true horror of a Primarch. He does not simply command, he renders complexity obsolete. In the mess halls, legionnaires ate mechanically. Conversations faltered mid-sentence when his shadow fell across the room. A single glance could instill discipline or halt actions entirely. It was not fear in the ordinary sense. It was the awareness that every decision, every movement, every breath was observed, even when not consciously, and weighed against the standard of inevitability Magnus embodied. It was impossible to hide failure, impossible to rebel, impossible to escape. Even whispers of dissent died before they could form. Deeper still, in the heart of the ship, the machinery strained against the demands placed upon them. Each drive core emitted vibrations that Magnus felt in his bones. He walked among them, not to inspect, but because his presence alone maintained harmony. The ship was vast, larger than most cities, yet every system functioned with perfect synchronicity. It was a living cathedral of war, designed not for humans, but for the Primarch. And within that cathedral, the soldiers realized a terrible truth. They were not in charge of their own survival. They were components in a machine that was beyond comprehension. Outside, the void stretched black and infinite. Enemy fleets gathered like clouds of locusts, yet none dared approach recklessly. Rumors of the Phalanx Obsidian's presence spread across systems. Worlds whispered about the incomprehensible mind that commanded it. Entire planets considered surrender before a single bolter round was fired, knowing instinctively that resistance was not merely futile, it was irrelevant. Magnus did not strike yet. He observed, calculated, anticipated. And that is the most terrifying weapon of all. Inevitability, radiating from a mind whose capacity dwarfed that of an entire planet's command structure. In the 41st millennium, to exist aboard a ship under a Primarch's presence is to live under the shadow of inevitability. There is no choice, there is no freedom, only obedience. And when the Primarch walks, the universe itself bends to accommodate his cognition. Because in the end, the galaxy does not fear a weapon, it fears certainty incarnate.
The deeper Magnus moved into the heart of the Phalanx Obsidian, the quieter the corridors became. Not silent exactly. The engines hummed, the conduits throbbed with energy, and servitors continued their endless tasks. Yet there was a stillness in the air, a pressure that weighed on thoughts, bending them toward order. Every soldier aboard felt it. Every human, every augmented warrior, every psyker. A single step out of line was corrected instinctively, almost before the misstep occurred. The Primarch's presence did not issue commands, it reoriented reality itself. To serve under a Primarch is to experience perfect enforcement of inevitability. In the armories, weapons responded as if alive. Bolters aligned automatically with targets before operators could shoulder them. Chainswords adjusted their vibration frequency mid-spin. Plasma rifles calibrated their coils to optimal temperature for anticipated engagements. The Marines themselves did not notice these adjustments consciously. They only knew that when they lifted a weapon, it functioned perfectly. That the chaos of battle was muted, filtered, rendered manageable by forces beyond comprehension. It was obedience without thought. Servitors labored tirelessly, welding, calibrating, cleaning, adjusting. They were extensions of Magnus's cognition,
functioning with precision that human hands could never sustain. Every bolt, every servo, every conduit was aligned to his presence, and yet he did not touch a single control. The ship responded to him as instinctively as a tide follows the moon. A single flick of thought altered the trajectory of engines, rebalanced gravitic stabilizers, and rerouted power to weapons that had not yet been engaged. The Primarch did not merely exist aboard the ship, he was its operational system. The officers, once confident in their command, now felt subordinate to inevitability. Reports were delivered, calculations offered, options proposed, but Magnus's gaze reduced them to noise. He did not dismiss them exactly, he simply reframed their relevance. A single thought in his mind reshaped fleets, adjusted planetary defenses, and anticipated enemy maneuvers. What his subordinates suggested had value only when it aligned with that thought. Otherwise, it existed only as inconsequential clutter. In the mess halls, legionnaires moved mechanically. They ate. They spoke in muted tones, their postures straightened instinctively as he passed. Conversation faltered, whispers died mid-sentence. Every presence aboard the ship felt the quiet pressure of an intellect vast enough to encompass them all, to anticipate every action before it was taken. Even the most daring soldier dared not err. Even the bravest psyker suppressed impulses that might divert resources or energy from the Primarch's vision. Outside, in the void, enemy fleets adjusted as if sensing the ship's intent. They did not know why, only that engagement would be suicide. Entire systems, entire sectors whispered in fear of the inevitability radiating from one mind aboard one ship. Magnus did not act yet. He observed, calculated, anticipated. And in that anticipation, the galaxy itself seemed to slow. Time, strategy, space, they were all subject to the presence of a being who understood them not as abstract concepts, but as a lattice to be bent, folded, and controlled. The horror is not in Magnus's power. It is in the quiet obedience of everyone and everything around him. Not one machine falters, not one legionnaire hesitates, not one psychic current escapes unmonitored. It is perfection imposed not through force, but through presence. And in the 41st millennium, nothing is more terrifying than perfection that cannot be resisted.
The phalanx obsidian groaned and vibrated under the strain of its own size. Every engine, every gravitic stabilizer, every fusion core worked tirelessly, anticipating the demands Magnus would place upon them. The ship was not merely a vessel, it was an extension of his cognition, a living cathedral of inevitability. Legionaries walked the corridors in near-perfect silence. Every movement was calibrated, every gesture precise, every thought aligned. They did not question, they did not hesitate. Even when exhaustion clawed at their limbs, the weight of inevitability imposed by their Primarch compelled continuation. Obedience was no longer choice, it was existence. Magnus did not need to speak. His presence alone reorganized priorities, recalibrated defenses, and realigned every operative within the ship. Tactical displays flickered and shifted in perfect synchronicity with his thoughts. Orders flowed invisibly through the Legion, not as commands, but as inevitabilities. A single Marine faltered. Magnus noticed. He did not scold, he did not strike, he merely looked. And in that gaze, the Marine straightened, corrected his actions, and continued as though the hesitation had never occurred. The terror of serving under a Primarch is subtle. It is the understanding that your choices are not your own.
that every action is filtered through a mind far greater, far faster, far more certain than your own. Below decks, servitors worked tirelessly. Pistons pumped, coolant flowed, and arcane machinery hummed with precise regularity. They were extensions of Magnus's will, performing maintenance and adjustments without pause. Every bolt tightened, every conduit aligned, every weapon primed, all without direct command. The machinery of obedience was complete, and the soldiers knew it. Even the officers, trained to think independently, realized the futility of initiative. Their intelligence, their judgment, their experience all became secondary to the inevitability radiating from the Primarch. Outside the ship, the void waited. Enemy fleets gathered with arrogance, unaware that they faced not a fleet of vessels, but a singular consciousness bending all elements toward a predetermined outcome. Planetary systems watched, knowing instinctively that resistance was not merely foolish, it was impossible. Magnus observed them, calculated, anticipated. He did not act yet. Action was unnecessary. Presence alone reshaped reality. And yet the soldiers, the servitors, the ship itself bore the weight of perfection. Every error corrected instantly, every flaw eliminated before it could manifest, every hesitation absorbed, redirected, or erased. The burden was silent, invisible, and total. This is what makes the largest ship in the Imperium terrifying when commanded by a Primarch. Not its size, not its weapons, not the legion aboard, but the quiet tyranny of inevitability. The crushing perfection imposed without words, the subtle understanding that failure is not an option because the very nature of the Primarch ensures it cannot exist. Every being aboard is a component in a lattice of purpose, every system a thread in a web of consequence, every life tethered to thought alone. And in the 41st millennium, to exist under that weight is to confront the ultimate truth. Your choices do not matter. Only his does. Only inevitability does. And when inevitability walks, the galaxy itself bends.
The void outside the phalanx obsidian was empty, yet alive with the distant hum of stars, the faint resonance of warp currents, and the tension of approaching conflict. Magnus stood at the observation deck, towering over the bridge, and the legion gathered below. He did not speak. He did not need to. Every eye, every mind, every heartbeat aboard the ship synchronized instinctively with his presence. The galaxy was vast, infinite, but even infinity bowed to him. Legionaries moved through the corridors with methodical precision. Their steps echoed against steel walls, yet no sound felt accidental. Servitors adjusted systems and weapons silently, anticipating Magnus's slightest thought. The ship itself responded like a living organism, its engines pulsing in rhythm with his cognition. And yet, he paused. It was the calm before the storm, a pause heavy with inevitability. The largest ship in the Imperium, a fortress capable of planetary annihilation, floated as still as a shadow in the void. Every legionary, every officer, every servitor waited, because even a delay in obedience was impossible to ignore. Reports were delivered without ceremony. Tactical analyses, warp readings, enemy movement projections, they were irrelevant to him until he deemed them necessary. His gaze swept across the data hololiths, perceiving not individual elements, but patterns, consequences, probabilities. Entire campaigns unfolded in his mind before they began. This was not strategy, it was foresight. And foresight, when wielded by a Primarch, was indistinguishable from inevitability. Outside, enemy fleets gathered in scattered formations. They believed themselves unseen,
unchallenged, even clever. They did not know that the phalanx obsidian and its Primarch did not simply act, they anticipated. Every maneuver, every formation, every attempt at concealment had already been considered, evaluated, and neutralized before it occurred. The galaxy feared weapons, fleets and fleets of soldiers, but Magnus was neither fleet nor weapon. He was the law of consequence made flesh, the embodiment of inevitability. Even the bridge officers, experienced veterans of countless campaigns, felt the weight of futility pressing against their minds. Their training, their skill, their intelligence, all subordinate to the presence of a being whose thought spanned worlds and star systems simultaneously. A single miscalculation among them could ripple across a sector and be corrected instantly, invisibly, without Magnus ever speaking a word. And that was the most terrifying lesson of all. He did not need to command. His presence alone ensured that nothing could go wrong, or if it did, it would be corrected before anyone realized. The silence was not comforting, it was oppressive. Every legionary knew that perfection demanded vigilance. Every servitor understood that failure was impossible. And every officer comprehended that their own understanding of tactics, strategy, and leadership paled against the unrelenting calculus of a Primarch's mind. Even the air seemed to hum with tension, charged by the weight of his cognition. The largest ship in the Imperium was a cathedral of inevitability, and every component of it, living or mechanical, moved in perfect obedience to a singular, incomprehensible will. Magnus turned from the observation deck, moving down the central corridor. Legionaries flanked him without question. Servitors trailed, adjusting and repairing silently. The ship itself responded instantly to his passage. Engines harmonized, gravitic stabilizers aligned, weapon systems primed, shields reinforced. It was preparation for war, and yet it was more than that. It was demonstration. The galaxy could see fleets, could see soldiers, could see firepower, but none could perceive inevitability. None could witness a Primarch at the apex of command, bending men, machines, and the void itself into alignment with a mind that was both infinite and absolute. And for those who understood, the terror was immediate. Not what Magnus could do, but what was inevitable under him.
Magnus moved through the core of the phalanx obsidian, and the ship responded as if it were alive. Every engine throbbed in resonance with his thoughts. Every conduit realigned to optimize energy flow. Every weapon system calibrated itself before a command could be spoken. Legionaries followed, their movements precise and unwavering. They did not see him as a commander. They saw him as inevitability made flesh. Every step, every gesture, every breath of theirs bent to his cognition. The galaxy could produce fleets, armies, even entire planetary systems of soldiers, but none could escape the calculus of annihilation a Primarch imposes. Reports flooded the bridge hololiths, but Magnus's gaze cut through them instantly, filtering out irrelevance and highlighting only the critical. Enemy fleet positions, warp anomalies, supply lines, planetary defenses, all calculated in his mind with terrifying speed. Probabilities, contingencies, collateral outcomes, he computed them simultaneously, folding time and space into a lattice of precision that mortals could not even perceive. One thought, and the entire battle would be anticipated. One calculation, and victory would be unavoidable. The officers present understood this instinctively, even if they could not comprehend the mechanics. A misstep in judgment, a hesitation in decision, a single act of rebellion, all would be absorbed, corrected, or erased before it could manifest. Magnus's mind did not merely command, it enveloped, it preempted, it dominated the battlefield before any weapon was fired. Even the enemy was not safe from the inevitability of his cognition. Fleets maneuvered unknowingly into positions he had already determined. Warp currents bent subtly to delay their attacks. Systems he intended to conquer stabilized before his forces arrived. Each action outside his Primarch's presence was measured and anticipated with precision. And yet, Magnus did not smile. He did not rejoice. The inevitability of victory was not entertainment, it was duty. Every calculation, every adjustment, every preparation was a necessity. The universe demanded order, and Magnus imposed it, quietly, silently, without hesitation. In the corridors, the legionaries felt it too. The weight of inevitability pressed upon their minds. Obedience was no longer a choice, it was survival. Even the smallest error was absorbed and corrected, often invisibly, leaving the soldier unaware that they had faltered at all. Outside the ship, enemy forces prepared for war, unaware that their movements were already irrelevant. Entire planets held their breath, sensing the unspoken authority of a Primarch aboard the largest vessel in the Imperium. Systems bent instinctively, populations complied without knowing why, and entire fleets hesitated at the edge of engagement. The galaxy feared fleets, weapons, and armies, but the truth was simpler. The galaxy feared inevitability. Magnus embodied it. In the bowels of the ship, servitors labored endlessly, performing maintenance, repairs, and adjustments without instruction. Their metal hands moved in perfect synchronization with the rhythms of the Primarch's thought. Every bolt tightened, every conduit aligned, every weapon calibrated, all without conscious direction. The machinery of the ship and the minds of its soldiers had become inseparable. Magnus did not control them. He was the axis of their function, the center of the machine itself. And this is the true horror of a Primarch. Not that they can destroy worlds, not that they can lead armies, not that they can dominate minds, but that their presence alone renders failure impossible and choice irrelevant. The phalanx obsidian was not just a vessel, it was inevitability made tangible. And those aboard it were not mere soldiers, they were living extensions of a mind that could calculate war, life, and death with precision beyond comprehension. In the 41st millennium, that is power beyond gods.
The battle had not yet begun, but it had already been decided. Magnus stood at the command nexus of the phalanx obsidian, his gaze sweeping the void. Enemy fleets gathered like clouds of predation, but to him they were already accounted for. Every ship, every maneuver, every potential strike was folded into his mind's lattice of inevitability. Victory was no longer a possibility, it was certainty. And with certainty came silence. Legionaries lined the corridors, every movement exact, every breath measured. They were alive, yet hollowed by obedience. To serve under a Primarch was to feel the weight of inevitability pressing into the soul. Even the most disciplined soldier, trained to act independently, moved as if preordained, their thoughts and actions guided by a mind beyond comprehension. Servitors scuttled tirelessly along the edges of the corridors, repairing, adjusting, and calibrating in perfect harmony with Magnus's presence. They were extensions of the ship and extensions of him. A misaligned bolt, a faltering conduit, a weapon improperly charged, nothing could escape the quiet enforcement of inevitability.
The enemy fleets, vast and arrogant, prepared to engage. They had numbers, firepower, and strategy, yet they were already in the wrong positions. Warp currents subtly bent, psychers misinterpreted visions, and planetary defenses stabilized before the Primarch's forces even deployed. The universe itself had shifted in anticipation. Magnus did not celebrate. He did not shout orders. He did not gesture. His presence alone orchestrated the machinery of war with absolute precision. Every thought was action. Every glance was command. The officers on the bridge did not dare speak unless prompted. Their knowledge, their experience, their judgment, all subordinate to the calculus of a mind that operated on scales they could not perceive. Even the air aboard the Phalanx Obsidian felt heavy, charged with the weight of inevitable consequence. Legionaries sensed it. They obeyed without hesitation, fought without question, and endured without complaint. To falter was not failure, it was impossible. To resist was not rebellion, it was irrelevant. The Primarch's presence was more terrifying than any weapon, more oppressive than any siege, more absolute than death itself. Magnus turned from the observation deck, moving toward the central war chamber. Every system aboard the ship adjusted instinctively to him. Engines pulsed in rhythm, shields reinforced along stress points, weapon arrays aligned with pre-calculated enemy vectors. The Phalanx Obsidian was no longer a vessel, it was an extension of cognition, a cathedral of inevitability, a fortress that existed to enforce the Primarch's vision. And those who served within its hull, soldiers, servitors, and officers alike, understood the truth without words. They were part of a machine that could not fail, and yet was more than any mind should bear. Outside, the enemy moved, a fleet of worlds, thinking strategy could counter inevitability. But Magnus had already seen their movements, calculated their outcomes, and aligned every system to intercept, neutralize, and destroy. The universe itself was an instrument of his will. It was not victory that was terrifying, it was inevitability. The largest ship in the Imperium, the mightiest legion, and the mind of a Primarch converged into one truth. Resistance was a concept rendered obsolete. The galaxy did not fear Magnus for his strength, for his intellect, or even for his legions. It feared the certainty of his existence. Because in the 41st millennium, to stand beneath a Primarch is to confront the impossible, that the universe bends to a single will, and that all outcomes are preordained before they begin. The silence after certainty was suffocating, and within it, the shadow of inevitability stretched across the stars, unbroken, unstoppable, and absolute.